Bethany, whenever you're ready, we'll start. So good evening, everyone. Good evening. I want to welcome you all to the CUNY Graduate Center and express how excited I am to be at this event with you all tonight. So I want to go over a little bit of housekeeping. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Futures Initiative, I want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get on with our program. So I want to thank our co-sponsors, which is the New School, CLAGS, and Lambda. We could not have done this work without those incredible partnerships. I also want to thank all of our FI staff who are in the building and our fellows. So a round of applause to the fellows. Our graduate fellows take a key role in all of our events as well as our staff. So thank you all. And also, if you are on social media tonight, please use the hashtag TheseBurningStars and follow us. And then also, if you're not familiar with FI, I invite you to visit our website to follow us on social media. By show of hands, how many people here are familiar with the Futures Initiative? Okay, well, you're gonna all become familiar now. So let's talk a little bit about FI. So the Futures Initiative was founded in 2014 here at the CUNY Graduate Center by Cathy Davidson, right here in the front. Yeah. We focus on equity and innovation in higher education. And the Futures Initiative develops a number of team taught courses here at the Graduate Center. We have a number of grants for our PhD students. We have micro grants. We have a number of programs for our undergraduates, including the CUNY Peer Leaders Program. We have an amazing newsletter that I would encourage you all to subscribe to, and also welcome you to follow us on social media. So I now want to get into my brief bio of Cathy Davidson. And let me just say that it's impossible to summarize Cathy inside of a paragraph, but I'll try. So Cathy Davidson is the Senior Advisor on Transformation to the Chancellor of the City University of New York. She is also the founder of the Futures Initiative, and she is a distinguished professor in English, there's more, digital humanities, and data analysis. She is the author of over 20 books. That's a lot, 20 books. Her most recent book, The New College Classroom, co-authored with Christina Katapodis in the back. Can we give Christina a round of applause? Their book is the 2023 winner of the Frederick Ness Book Award. Dr. Davidson has also won the Ness Prize for the New Education. So she is the only person who is a two-time winner of this very distinguished award. I think that warrants a round of applause as well. And also I would like to add that Dr. Davidson is the founder of Haystack. Haystack is the Humanities, Arts, Science, and Technology Alliance and Collaboratory, the world's first and oldest academic network. She has served on the board of directors of Mozilla. She was appointed by President Obama to the National Council on the Humanities and has twice keynoted the Nobel Prize Committee's Forum on the Future of Learning. And she is recently finishing writing her speculative science fiction novel, Bountiful, and is currently working on the second novel of her Force of Nature trilogy. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Cathy Davidson.
I don't think Adashima, and this is typical, said her own name. Adashima Oyo, who you just heard from, is our executive director, our fearless leader. She's amazing. So welcome everyone who's here tonight. There's a million things you could be doing, and that you're here tonight means so much to us, and I know to Bethany, who I had the pleasure of meeting just a little while ago tonight. I personally am so excited about this event. I mean, it's a spark of joy at a really terrible time, a moment of fiction and speculation in a queer space opera amid violence and hate and genocide in our day. Personally, I'm very grateful tonight because I've been stalking Bethany for 3 years, and I'm going to try to behave myself tonight. My stalking began pre-pandemic in 2019. With a very tantalizing post on Facebook. The dazzling writer and scholar Margaret Rhee. Where is dazzling Margaret Rhee? Did she step out? There's dazzling Margaret Rhee. Dazzle. who will be interviewing Bethany tonight, was then a professor at Buffalo University and in a small science fiction writing group with Bethany and writer and new media designer Josephine Anstey. I knew Margaret through her scholarly writing, through her poetry, and through Facebook, where she posted that a member of her writing group was leaving and they were looking for a fill-in. Little known to Margaret, or pretty much anyone since I was doing it in secret, in 2017, I'd realized nonfiction was not up to the task of understanding and addressing the dystopia steamrolling through our society in real time. I was walking along the Northern California coast one dazzling morning, gazing out at sea lions and soaring hawks as the president of the most powerful nation on earth was joyfully rescinding one protective environmental law after another and bellowing that climate change was a hoax. I began writing my science fiction novel that day, September 9th, 2017, conceiving in that moment of my character Atsila, who speaks 13 human and 54 animal languages and is leading a post-World War III cross-species campaign of resistance. I began reading science fiction voraciously and quietly began the long, long task of relearning how to write, right? And we'll be talking about that tomorrow, what it means to write, the craft of writing at an event at the New School. And then Margaret posted her invitation, and I was so happy because I'd been spending the 4 hours before dawn each day and before my workday began learning how to be a different kind of writer than I'd been before. And suddenly, I was in a science fiction writing group that we now call Second Sundays. And we've literally been meeting every 1 month, the second Sunday of every month, for 3 years now. It's a group of writers, a game designer, Jess Arion, who's here tonight. Where's Jess? Multi-generational, multinational, multiracial, multisexual, multi-genres, glorious, real, loving, and very tough writers reading each other's work. It's an incredible community, and I think it's gotten us through the pandemic and beyond. Each, I would say, week or month or so, Margaret would tell us about this mythical human being, this goddess, Bethany Jacobs. It was so exciting to hear about somebody who'd given up her job. That's heroic. I'm sorry. Given up her job and had dropped out of this writing group too, just to concentrate solely on writing the, I'm going to get the name wrong because I'm nervous, her trilogy, and whose agent sold brightly burning stars to Orbit, the great fiction house Orbit. Bethany, you have become a mythic figure in all our imaginaries. It is an enormous pleasure to be able to host the New York City launch of these burning stars. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Bethany and Margaret, who will be interviewing her. And then Bethany will read for 20 minutes. Margaret will next interview her for 20 minutes. If we have time, I'll open the floor for questions. We have books for sale, although this sounds like science fiction, but it's true. Our bookseller is trapped between floors in an elevator somewhere in New York, and we hope she'll get to us in time. But if not, we'll have to figure out how we'll proceed. I have a little line here that's saying you can quietly go and buy this book at any time during this, but we have to wait till she gets released from her elevator. I'm not making that up, it's true. Bethany Jacobs is a former college instructor of writing and science fiction. She has her PhD in American literature from the University of Oregon and was a postdoctoral fellow at Georgia Institute of Technology. She quit her day job and everything else to concentrate on writing her fabulous Kingdom trilogy. When she is not writing, she is a gluttonous consumer of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. She loves typing out new recipes, decrying world politics, and snuggling in bed with a TV show that she's already watched 10 times. She lives in Buffalo, New York, with her wonderful wife, Mary, also here today, and her dog and her books. Margaret Rhee, the dazzling Margaret Rhee, is a poet, new media artist, and scholar. She's the author of the prize-winning Love, Robot, and author of poetry chapbooks Yellow and Radio Heart, or How Robots Fall Out of Love. Her new media art project, The Kimchi Poetry Machine, was selected for Electronic Literature Collection Volume 3. Forthcoming from Duke University Press is her book, Machine Dreams, Race, Robots, and the Asian American Body, and she has yet another collection of lyrical essays on electronic literature currently under review. She's assistant professor of writing across media and chair of the arts writing program at the New School, and is the co-host of today's event, as well as a grad coffee with Bethany tomorrow at the New School from 11:30 to 12:30 p.m. If anyone's interested in that, Margaret and Bethany can tell you the details of how to get there. It's an in-person, face-to-face event. As someone who has published more than my share of books and who is a partner, Ken Wissaker, who's senior executive editor at Duke University Press, I know, and some academics here might not know, that the publishing profession, especially in this post-academic time, is under every bit as much economic and political stress as academe. So before turning this over to Bethany and Margaret, I want to quickly thank all the people who made tonight's event possible and also this book possible. First of course, is all our amazing Futures Initiative team who have done a great job organizing, orchestrating, and publicizing this event and this glorious novel. I also want to thank the book publishing side of things. Thanks to Bethany's brilliant editor, agent Bridget Smith, who's here today. From Orbit, which is a division of Hatchet, which is my own publisher. Special thanks to Tiana Coven, Angela Mann, Ellen Wright, and now William Morrow, Priyanka Krishnan, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'd also like to thank a few other people. This is very personal. Diana Fall, I think Diana's, yes, who came to visit our writing group and gave us such wonderful advice, formerly an editor at Tor, now the executive director of Irwan Press, and herself a major science fiction writer. Marco Palmieri, another legendary editor, also formerly of Tor, currently senior producer at Realm, who I had the privilege of working with at 2 terrible first drafts of the novel. He really taught me how to write. Thank you, Marco. My own genius, tireless agent, Deirdre Mullane, couldn't be here tonight. She had yet another author event. She's on Zoom, I'm told. And she was the one who not only took my own science fiction through 3 pretty bad drafts. She said, wow, editors are going to be there. You have to realize in this post-pandemic climate, every editor has 5 or 6 different events to go to every night. So thank you on behalf of all of us for being here. I know how much it means to Bethany. It certainly means a lot to us that you're all here. We need fiction in these times when logic cannot comprehend our moment. We need art when politics fail us. We need each other in these dispiriting times. And we need these burning stars, a cat and mouse space opera romp where 3 very different women and 1 very shadowy trickster hunt down a secret about genocide. Please join me in the heartiest of welcomes for Bethany Jacobs.
Hi, everyone. Am I loud enough? Thank you so much for being here. I would wax poetic about it, but then I'd cry. So let's avoid that. This is actually the first time I've ever read in public. So remember that I'm not an audiobook narrator. And let's do this. Speak up just a little. Thank you, baby. Her ship alighted on the tarmac with engines snarling, hot air billowing out from beneath the thrusters. The hatch opened with a hiss, and she disembarked to the stench of jump gates that had so recently spit her into McKess's orbit, a smell like piss and ozone. Underfoot, blast burns scorched the ground, signatures from ships that had been coming and going for 300 years. Thank you. Let's try that. The township, how's that? The township of Principes would have no cause for so much activity if it weren't for the kin school that loomed ahead. She was hungry, a little annoyed. There was a marble of nausea lodged in the base of her throat, a leftover effect of being flung from one star system to another in the space of 2 minutes. This part of McKess was cold and wet, and she disliked the monotonous sable plains flowing away from the tarmac. She disliked the filmy dampness in the air. If the kin school master had brought her here for nothing, she would make him regret it. The school itself was all stone and mortar and austerity. Somber-looking effigies stared down at her from the parapet of the 2nd-story roof, the 6 gods assembled like jurors. She looked over her shoulder at her trio of novitiates, huddled close to one another, watchful, birds of prey in common brown. By contrast, she was quite resplendent in her red gold coat, the ends swishing around her ankles as she started toward the open gates. She was a cleric of the kingdom, a holy woman, a member of the righteous hand. In this school were many students who longed to be clerics and saw her as the pinnacle of their own aspirations, but she doubted any had the potential to match her. Already the kin school master had appeared. They met in the small courtyard under the awning of the entryway, his excitement and eagerness instantly apparent. He bowed over his hands a degree lower than necessary, a simpering flattery. In these star systems, power resided in the hands of the kingdom, and it resided in the first families. She was both. Thank you for the honor of your presence, Burning One. She made a quick blessing over him, wrote, and they walked together into the school. The novitiates trailed behind, silent as the statues that guarded the walls. As if reading her mind, the kin master said, "It seems a lifetime since you were my student." She chuckled, which he was welcome to take as friendly or mocking. They walked down a hallway lined with portraiture of the most famous students and masters in the school's history. The master said, "I hope your return pleases you." She wondered what they'd done with her own watercolor portrait. She recalled looking very smug in it, which, to be fair, was not an uncommon condition for her. "I was on Taros when I got your message. Anywhere is better than that garbage rock." The master smiled timidly. "Of course, Taros is an unpleasant planet. Makes is the planet of your heart and the most beautiful of all." He sounded like a tourist pamphlet, extolling the virtues of the many planets that populated the star systems. She grunted. He asked, "Was your trip pleasant?" "Hardly any reentry disturbance. Didn't even vomit during the jump." They both laughed, him a little nervously. They walked down a narrow flight of steps and turned onto the landing of a wider staircase of deep blue marble. She paused and went to the banister, gazing down at the room below. 6 children stood in a line, each as rigid as the staves they held at their sides. They couldn't have been older than 10 or 11. They were dressed identically in tunics and leggings, and their heads were shaved. They knew she was there, but they did not look up at her. Staring straight ahead, they put all their discipline on display, and she observed them like a butcher in a meat market. "Fourth years," she remarked, noticing the appliques on their chests. They were slender and elfin-looking, even the bigger ones. "I promise you, Saw, you won't be disappointed." She started down the staircase, brisk and cheerful, ignoring the students. They had no names, no gender marks, and no humanity as far as their teachers were concerned. They were called by numbers, given "it" for a pronoun. She herself was called 3 once, just another object honed for a purpose. Legally, troubled children had the right to gender themselves as soon as they discovered what fit, but these children would have to wait until they graduated. Only then could they take genders and names. Only then would they have their own identities. At the foot of the staircase, she made a sound at her novitiates. They didn't follow her farther, taking sentry on the last step. On the combat floor, she gloried in the familiar smells of wood and stone and sweat. She wandered around the room, brushing past the students as if they were scenery. The anticipation ratcheted, the 6 students trying hard not to move. When she did finally look at them, it was with the quick twist of her neck, eyes locking on with predatory precision. All but one flinched, and she smiled. She brought her hand out from where it had been resting on the hilt of her dagger and saw several of them glance at the weapon, a weapon ordinarily reserved for cloaks on. This was just one of the things that must make her extraordinary to the students. Add to this the things she represented, not just the clerisy itself in all its holy power, but the future the students might have. When they finished their schooling, if they finished, they would be one step closer to a position like hers. They would have power and prestige and choice to adopt gender marks, to take their family names again, or create new ones. But so much lay between them and that future. If all went right, they'd receive an appointment to one of the 3 hands of the kingdom, but only if they worked hard, only if they survived. "Tell me," she said to them all, "what is the mission of the kingdom?" They answered in chorus, "Peace under the kingdom, unity in the treble." "Good." She looked each one over carefully, observed their proudly clasped staves. Though staves was a stretch, the long poles in their hands were made from a heavy-duty foam composite, strong enough to bruise, even to break skin, but not bones. "And what are the three pillars of the kingdom?" she asked. "Righteousness, cleverness, brutality." She hummed approval. Righteousness for the clerisy, cleverness for the secretaries, brutality for the cloaks on. The three hands. She gave the Kinschool master a curt nod. His eyes lit up, and he turned to the students like a conductor to his orchestra. With theatrical aplomb, he clapped once. It seemed impossible that the 6 students could get any smarter, but they managed it, brandishing their staves with stolid expressions. She searched for cracks in the facades, for shadows and tremors. She saw several. They were so young, and it was to be expected in front of someone like her. Only one of them was a perfect statue. Her eyes flicked over this one for a moment longer than the others. The master barked, "One." Immediately, 5 of the children turned on the 6th, staves sweeping into offense like dancers taking position. And then, oh, what a dance it was. The first blow was like a clap against one's shoulder, the second a heavy thwack on its thigh. It fought back hard. It had to, swinging its stave in furious arcs and trying like hell not to be pushed too far off balance. She watched its face, how the sweat broke out, how the eyes narrowed, and its upper teeth came down on its lip to keep from crying out when one of the children struck it again hard on the hip. The sound was particularly good, a crack that made it stumble and lose position. The 5 children gave no quarter, and then there was a 5th blow and a 6th, and "Done," boomed the master. Instantly, all 6 children dropped back into line, staves at rest beside them. The first child was breathing heavily. Someone had got it in the mouth. The master waited a few seconds, pure showmanship, and said, "2." The dance began again, 5 students turning against the other. This was an old game with simple rules. Essex had played it many times herself when she was called 3. The attack went on until either offense or defense landed 6 blows. It was impressive if the attacked child scored a hit at all. And yet, as she watched the progressing bouts, some students did make marks. The children were merciless with one another, crowding their victim in, jabbing and kicking and swinging without reprieve. Her lip curled back in raw delight. These students were vicious. But by the time the 5th student lost its round, they were getting sloppy. They were bruised, bleeding, tired. Only the 6th remained to defend itself, and everything would be slower and less controlled now. But when the master said 6, something changed in the room. She couldn't miss the strange note in the master's voice of pleasure and expectation. The children, despite their obvious fatigue, snapped to attention like rabbits scenting a predator. They didn't rush at 6 as they had rushed at one another. No, suddenly they moved into a half-circle formation, approaching this last target with an unmistakable caution. Their gazes sharpened, and they gripped their staves tighter than before, as if expecting to be disarmed. The sweat and blood stood out on their faces, and one of them quickly wiped a streak away. And 6, the one who commanded this sudden tension, this careful advance, it stood a moment, taking them all in at once, stare like a razor's edge, and then it flew. She could think of no other word for it. It was like a whirling storm, and its stave was a lightning strike. No defensive stance for this one. It went after the nearest student with a brutal spinning kick that knocked it on its ass. Then it whipped its body to the left and cracked its stave against a different student's shoulder, and finished with a jab to yet another carelessly exposed shin. All of this happened before the 5 attackers even had their wits about them, and for a moment she thought they would throw their weapons down, cower, and retreat. Instead, they charged. It was like watching a wave that had gone out to sea suddenly surge upon the shore. They didn't fight as individuals, but as one corralling force, spreading out and pressing in. They drove 6 back and back and back against the wall. For the first time, they struck it hard in the ribs, and a moment later they got it again across the jaw. The sound sent a thrill down her spine, made her fingers clench in hungry eagerness for a stave of her own. She watched the sixth fighter's jaw flush with blood and the promise of bruising, but it didn't falter. It swept its stave in an arc, creating an opening. It struck one of them, then another, and a third. 6 blows altogether. The students staggered, their offense broken, their wave disintegrating. She glanced at their master, waiting for him to announce the conclusion of the match and its decisive victor. To her great interest, he did no such thing, nor did the children seem to expect he would. They recovered and charged. Was the sixth fighter surprised? Did it feel the sting of its master's betrayal? Not that she could tell. That face was a stony glower of intent, and those eyes were smart and ruthless. The exhaustion she'd seen in the students before gave way to an almost frenzied energy. How else could they hold their ground against 6? They parried and dodged and swung in increasingly desperate bursts, but through it all, the 6th kept hitting them. Gods, it was relentless. Even when the other students started to catch up, strikes to the hip, to the wrist, to the thigh, it kept going. The room was full of ragged gasping, but when she listened for 6's breath, it was controlled. Loud but steady, and its eyes never lost their militant focus. In the feverish minutes of the fight, it landed 18 strikes before finally one of the others got in a 6th blow, a lucky cuff across its already bruised mouth. The master called, "Done." The children practically dropped where they stood, their stave arms falling limply at their sides, their relief as palpable as the sweat in the air. Apparently, the kin school master had brought her here for a 4th year. He'd brought her here so he could show off his shining star. She herself left kin school years earlier than any student in Principes's history, a mere 15 when she became a novitiate. Clearly, the master wanted to break her record, to have this student noticed by her, recruited by her as an 11-year-old. What a feather that would be in the master's cap. She looked at him directly, absorbing his smug expression. "Did its parents put you up to that?" she asked. The smugness bled from his face. He grew pale and cleared his throat. "It has no parents." "Interesting." The master said, clearly hoping to absolve himself. "After you, it's the most promising student I've ever seen. Its intelligence, its casting skills, she chuckled, cutting him off. "Many students are impressive in the beginning. In my 4th year, I wasn't the star. And the one who was the star that year, what happened to it? Why, I don't think it even graduated. 4th year is far too early to know anything about a student." She said these things as if the 6th student hadn't filled her with a visceral excitement, as if she didn't see, vast as the black ocean itself, what it might become. Then she noticed that the master had said nothing, no acquiescence, no apology. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. He cleared his throat again and said very lowly, "Its family name was Alanye." Her brows shot up. She glanced back at the child, who was not making eye contact. At this distance, it couldn't have heard the master's words. "Really?" she asked. "Yes. A secretary adopted it after its father died. The secretary sent it here." She continued staring at the child. Watching it fight was exhilarating, but knowing its origins, that it was the descendant of a genocider, made her giddy. This was delicious. "Does it know?" she asked. The master barely shook his head no. She hummed a bright sound of pleasure. Turning from him, she strode toward the child, shaking open her knee-length coat. When she was still several feet away from it, she crooked a finger. "Come here, little fish. Let me have a look at you." Gets really good after that, but I have to stop.
I think this is on now.
Is it on now?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for that beautiful reading.
you.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. Can you all hear us okay? Just want to thank you so much, Bethany, for that just beautiful, amazing reading. I'm going to get very effusive because I'm also a big fan, but I think there's just such a visceral difference of hearing the author read from reading the novel. So that was such a treat and such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before we begin, I just want to just take a moment to thank again the CUNY Graduate Center and the Futures Initiative. So much labor and so much love that goes into creating these spaces, especially across campuses. So I want to thank everyone who was involved and thank especially Cathy Davidson for her generosity in creating space for us. I think Cathy is not only a model as a scholar and as an educator, but also someone committed to building community as in all her roles, especially also as a science fiction writer. So her novel is amazing. We're going to look forward to the next celebration. And I think this is where community comes in, where we have these bridges and ties across campuses and across cities, etc. And I want to give a quick shout out, but enormous gratitude also to the New School graduate students who are here, Eric, Rec, and Mariana Lopez. They've done a lot of labor So we hope you come out tomorrow for a more intimate conversation, and to Lambda and class and Matt Brim for their support. We're going to get really queer. We talked about this conversation before, so just be prepared. I'm going to go ahead and
Always really queer.
I know. I think that's how we connected early on, but that's another story. Let's focus on the novel. So, the first question I have for you, Bethany, of this extraordinary novel, for those of you who haven't read it yet, I mean, really, I read it and I was like, Bethany, you're like a genius. You're like, I mean, this is just the deft way you were able to balance the intricate plot and narrative to just these stunning lines of just it's so poetic. It's such poetry. So I wanted to ask you for my first question. Again, your novel, These Burning Stars, is extraordinary in its world building, history, and the relationships that are formed. And I'm really glad you read that section. It's so visceral in terms of the relationships and the violence that happens between the children and how we get a sense of the characters. I wondered if you could just share a bit about your creative process and describe when this world and these characters came to you.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. Well, the first thing I want to say, and Cathy, forgive me for a significant correction. I did not quit my day job to write this book. I changed careers. And I changed careers so that I would have time to write it. And I actually think that's an important distinction to make, because so few of us who write can afford to stop working. And we should acknowledge how many writers throughout time have created the most important work out there in between taking care of their kids and after their kids went to sleep and after their day job and riding on the subway and things like that. So I think that's an important thing to remember. So my creative, are you guys familiar with the phrase plotter versus pantser? Okay, so a plotter is someone who's very OCD and they plan out everything about the book, the whole plot, the characters, things like that. And then a pantser is someone who sits down and says, let's see what happens. And I have always been an inveterate plotter. And I was very bored with what I had been working on. And so I sat down and I sort of wrote this random line about restless space pirates. And I just sort of went from there. And it was a way to try and get back to the fun and the pleasure of writing. But my nature came back to me, and then all of the world building documents and the plotting happened. And I think what's really important to my process is that I'm obsessed with history. My graduate work, my work as a scholar before I left academia was very rooted in understanding histories and how they impact contemporary experiences of oppression. And so for me, it's always thinking about what happened in the past and how does that affect the culture, the characters, the people, the things that happen, the technology today? And so what I write is an effort to answer that question. So my world building documents, my 15-page plot, outlines, my character graphs, that is a really necessary part of my process before I can start writing in earnest. So even though this book started as kind of a lark, it ended up being very complex, and I couldn't keep track of it all unless I had those documents. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a extensive history, absolutely, of this world. And I just admire how the book was published with the maps in the front and Orbit. I mean, the Orbit team is here. So yes. So, I mean, really just such a beautiful book. I guess going off of that, I'd love to hear a little more, maybe even, I guess, okay. I think, yeah, sharing in terms of how the mapping and everything kind of helped you stay organized with this extensive history. In addition to that, can we, maybe we could talk about gender. Let's talk about, yeah,
Okay,
let's talk about gender.
let's talk about gender.
Yeah. So especially with the section that you read, we learn early on that this world is quite dystopic in terms of this gender system. And, there are students at this elite academy that are denied gender and denied names. Quote, they have no names, no gender marks, and no humanity as far as their teachers are concerned. They were called by numbers, given it for a pronoun, unquote. I wondered if you could discuss the gender system in these burning stars, as well as the alternatives of where people can choose their gender and gender is physically marked on their skin.
Yeah, thanks. So I knew that I wanted to do something interesting with gender. I was really influenced early on in my career by the work of Marilyn Frye, who talks about how one of the first things we do when we see a person is we assign their gender, right? And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if there was literally a physical marking on someone that told us their gender? But in order for that to matter, it would have to be a world where gender can be selected, where it's not tied to sex, where it's not necessarily even tied to gendered behaviors. And so that was kind of where it started, was this idea of thinking about what would it be for gender to exist and be important in this culture. Everybody has gender in this culture, except for the kin school students. But that it's assigned completely differently. And it's interesting that you call it dystopic, because I've had some people say, well, this is actually a utopic prospect, right? If all of us could pick our gender, if there was no stigma attached to the gender that we selected, then that would certainly be a utopic condition. But it was not my intention to write a utopic gender system. And I think there are actually a lot of problems with this gender system. So for example, in a system like this, would we have trans people? And I think we need trans people. I think a world where we didn't have trans people would be a less rich world. And so if this erases that, what does that mean? And, I think that the idea of attaching a gender pronoun to humanity, which is what we see with the students who part of the marker of their non-humanity is that they don't have a gender. Well, that's very problematic, right? That we think that gender and humanity have to go together. So even though there are things about this that raise possibilities for a lot of us who I wish when I was a kid, I could have just said, this is my gender, and there would be no challenge to it, no question of it. That would be beautiful. So there's that possibility here, which is beautiful, but there's also, I think, some real problems to the system that can perpetuate other kinds of oppression.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I think there's a way so powerfully that science fiction can help us imagine, right, in terms of what is possible, especially around queerness and gender. And that exploration is just, I think, so liberatory and so key. And I think that's the limit of theory sometimes, right? Like it's sort of, there's the imagination like cuts it off.
Right.
So
Yeah.
anyways,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So, I guess in addition to that, if we can go through the queer route we discussed, this is a very sapphic novel, if I may say, with women killing, fighting, loving. There is a really beautiful, the sex scenes, okay, like between Liz and June. Perfect. I guess I'll read it. Is that all right? I read the quote. Okay, I'll just read it. Okay, quote, she moves faster. Liz's hand released her hair to grab her hip, then her ass urging her on. ... I'll stop there. So, but yeah, can you discuss a bit more of the challenges and the liberations of creating a woman-centered queer world? And I mean, that was a perfect sex scene. I mean, really. So, so yeah, can you tell us more about
So a
that?
couple things. Am I blushing? I don't know.
You wrote it.
So I did write, and then people read it. First of all, we are in a renaissance of sapphic science fiction and fantasy right now, and also a renaissance of just queer sci-fi, period. Writers like River Solomon, Neon Yang, Tasha Suri, Tamsin Muir. We've got just all of these amazing people who are writing queer sci-fi fantasy right now. And so the desire to write into that movement was very instinctive for me as a queer woman. And I'll also say that I'm a pretty prolific fan fiction writer. I just write the filthiest fan fiction. And I think we need that. I think that queer women and non-binary people and gay men and all different permutations of people, we need a place where we can see our fantasies come true, where we can see our love exist. And so in creating, because this is a queer normative world, it was easy to have, there be, there be these queer characters. And because I'm a queer person, and I had an amazing publisher, an amazing agent, there was never anything that was like, you need to tamp down on those lesbians. Right, and so like one of the things that I think is actually uncommon about the book is it has a strap-on scene. And like, we don't see strap-on scenes in this genre that is about technology, right? Why don't we have more strap-ons in science fiction? We should. And so to be able to say that we need t-shirts, science fiction should have more strap-ons, and the character who wears a strap-on has a prosthetic arm. So how can we think about like sexual aids as serving like a technical and societal purpose that is valuable and not just titillating, right? And they can be these tools of intimacy. And I think that queer spaces and queer writing and sapphic writing gives us this opportunity to talk about like not just what turns us on, but what makes us seen. And so that was, I'm very bored by any media or fiction that is not queer. These days, like I'll read it, but I'll wish that there were, queer people in it. And so I couldn't imagine writing something that wasn't queer. So.
Great, thanks for that. Excited for this t-shirt.
Imagine your mom reading that scene.
Oh no, yeah.
Apparently she loved it.
I want to also, I guess, just bridge to, I mean, in all seriousness with strap-ons. I mean, this is serious work that you're doing, as well as how you're grappling with violence and specifically the exploration of oppression and genocide and the Bethany genocide of 1589. Can you discuss your research on genocide and any challenges when writing about genocide in this world?
Yeah, I mean, I think an important thing for me to acknowledge is that I've never been the victim a genocide or directly impacted by a genocide. And so there's a responsibility to tread carefully and thoughtfully. So I'm thinking about the Jiveni, who are these characters who, this people group who have essentially served as a labor force for the energy trade, and who their home world was bombed, and the vast majority of them were annihilated in this bombing. And so I think about them from the perspective of refugees, and I think of them from the perspective of forced or undervalued labor. So when I was writing the experience of the Jiveni, I was thinking about the experience of Jewish refugees. I was thinking about Syrian refugees. I was thinking of Bosnian refugees. And then I was also thinking about African peoples brought over as slaves. I was thinking about Latinx farm workers, Asian railway workers. And so my scholarly background in this is that I wrote as an academic about social justice movements, and particularly the ways that women and mothers disrupt popular narratives of what a social justice movement should be. So when we look at the work of Audre Lorde, or we look at the work of Octavia Butler, we look at the work of Toni Morrison, they're really disrupting a simplistic idea of what resistance looks like. And so one of the things that I really wanted to get away from was this idea of a messianic figure who comes in and saves these refugee communities and comes in and saves these people who have been oppressed, but to instead think about what if that people group were taking care of themselves. And I think that's one of the things that those of us, particularly those of us who are white or who haven't been affected by the system, we tend to assume that we go in and we fix it. And we don't realize or recognize that communities are fixing themselves. I mean, there's a book by Sutton Griggs called Imperium and Imperio, where he actually talks about the existence of a nation within a nation. What if African Americans had a nation within their nation? And there's problems with the book, right? Like, it's not perfect, but we're the trope of nation within a nation is seated for most people in these very racist, anti-Semitic ideas of like Jewish overlords who control everything. And that's incredibly racist and anti-Semitic and problematic. But if we could think about what happens when communities take care of themselves, and we actually acknowledge and serve their ability to take care of themselves. And then the other thing, I was really influenced by a book by Sven Lundquist called Exterminate All the Brutes. You may have heard of it because HBO made a documentary series about it. And what Lundquist says is that when the Jewish Holocaust occurred, there were many people who ahistorically perpetuated this idea that this was a brand new thing. And while the Jewish Holocaust is unique and has unique characteristics, the pattern of genocide and colonialism that we see in the Holocaust had been practiced for centuries by European colonizers against people in the in Africa, people in the global South, people in lots of communities where it was more convenient to colonizers to just kill them than to actually try to change what they were trying to do. And so thinking about the way that genocide is sort of baked into a lot of Western culture, and how we have to, and how that is a curse upon us that we brought upon ourselves, that we have to contend with that curse if we're ever going to actually move beyond repeating these patterns of behavior that we're seeing in Palestine and we're seeing in these other places, that we have to contend with the history. So.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I think just as you've shared and illuminated, and as the book exemplifies, the ways that you're working through these intricate systems and histories of oppression is so powerful that I think, unfortunately, it does resonate with the moment that we're in right now, as well as in the past, as well as in the future. But I think it gives us hope to understand and to really sort of help us be informed around these systems. I guess in addition to that, and you've discussed some of the scholarly works that you've been engaging with, I know you've also, as someone with a doctorate in English and in women of color feminisms, in regards to your work on Octavia Butler, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how women of color, Black science fiction has informed your work.
It's the whole deal. Okay, so what I will say briefly is that one of the most important literary movements of the 20th and 21st century is Afrofuturism. And what it does to make us think about liberation and joy and celebration in the face of worlds that want us to only focus on misery and death is incredibly powerful. And then so Afrofuturism, Janelle Monáe, Sun Ra, all of these people who are doing this incredible work, look up Afrofuturism. If you're unfamiliar, it's the most incredible movement of art and music and literature and performance art and media studies. It will change the way you view the world. And then Octavia Butler wrote a short story called Bloodchild. Which is frequently people would say about this book that it was about slavery. And she says in an afterword to the book that it's not exclusively about slavery. It's actually about having to collaborate with your oppressor. And it's what happens when you are forced to collaborate with your oppressor. And women of color feminisms is so much about that. We particularly see a lot of women of color feminists talking about how even the men in their own resistance movements often contributed to their oppression. And another way to think about this is intersectionality. And the ways that women of color feminists are thinking intersectionally about how different power systems are contributing to the oppression of different people. And so that is at the core of how I think about power in my writing. It can't be a simple Emperor Palpatine is bad and we need the Jedis to come save us from Emperor Palpatine. It can't be Voldemort. It can't, when we really want to think about how oppression stops in the world, we need women of color feminisms to give us a vision that actually serves all people and not just people who can find their own lens of power within a broken system.
So yeah, that was actually my last question, but I just want to thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, this was, yeah.
Thank you. So at this time, we're going to take questions from the audience. We have about 20 minutes for questions. So yes. So who has the first question? We can bring the mic to you. Oh, comment. Okay, that's fine.
Which character in the book was your favorite to write?
This is funny because this is the question I always ask people when they've read the book. So my favorite character to write was my villain, Essek Nightfoot, who is the POV that you heard in that, because she's absolutely repulsive. And there was something very freeing about writing an absolutely repulsive character. My favorite character in terms of the one who I love with my whole heart, her name is Lise Cognier, and she's the one with the strap on. So, and she is a representative of goodness and resilience and wisdom, and she fucks. So she's my favorite. Yeah.
Other questions or comments of Bethany?
Hi, I was wondering.
What's your name, hon?
Oh, my name's Merlin.
Sorry, say that again.
Merlin.
Okay, thank you. I'm
Sorry, I don't know
partially
if I'm
deaf, so
talking
yeah.
loud enough, but I was wondering, like, how is your message and like revolution communicated differently in sci-fi than in other genres?
I'm so sorry. I'm having a little trouble understanding
sorry.
you. If you could just a little closer.
Yeah,
to the
I could
mic.
say it
Yeah.
louder. How is revolutionary, or how is what you're saying and like revolution communicated differently in sci-fi than in other genres?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So I don't think that I don't think we should ever say anything holistic about any genre, right? Because different sci-fi writers are thinking differently about revolution. I think what sci-fi does. So part of why I'm drawn to sci-fi is because it allows me to imagine that there actually is a future. And so often I think the message that we're told is that that there is no future, which I don't believe is true. I believe we do have a future. But I think what science fiction allows us to do is map our anxieties about oppression onto something bigger. So if I am a trans person who literally walks through my life conscious of the fact that I could experience violence at any point in time, what is the joy of a fantasy where I can literally have a spaceship and blow you up, right? And that's how I can protect myself. How can we map our anxieties about our current political leaders onto, nefarious sci-fi mobsters or the Emperor Palpatine type people? And so I think that all fiction can give us an opportunity and a way to think about revolution. But sometimes for me, contemporary literature, for example, feels too close. And I want to be able to go somewhere else to think about these issues. Because there I can actually work it out in a way that I don't have to necessarily fact check whether that MSNBC interview I'm quoting correctly, but I can still explore my anger about what's happening and the revolution that I want on an alien canvas, which gives us new opportunities for working through how we might solve that problem. Yeah, great question.
Other
I like your hair.
questions or comments for Bethany? I thought I saw a hand over there. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Were there any things that you really wanted to include in this book that you either had to cut out or didn't get to work in that maybe will show up in other works?
Are there anything that I wanted to include in this book that I had to leave out? The book is so, if I may say, very tightly plotted. So everything that I did had it was a house of cards. It had huge ramifications. There were things about the relationships between the characters and the past between the characters that I wanted to explore more. And so I'm doing it in the sequel, right? And I think that is why writing a trilogy is so fantastic, because there are things I'm writing the sequel right now, and there are things that I am not going to be able to do in the sequel that I'm like, well, put them in the third one. And so, there were definitely backstories and experiences that I was like, man, I really want to tell that story. I'm not going to be able to do it here, but all of the groundwork is there for me to do it later. I think there were a couple times where my editor told me to cut back on some of the language, the cursey language, and I think that's the only thing that I ever was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't say cunt in that scene, even though like I think it's the right word. She's like, yeah, maybe let's not say cunt. But no, I would say that the things that I still want to do, I'm going to do in the sequel and the third one. So, which makes me very lucky that I get to do that. So.
Okay, I'm going to come this way and then I'll come to you, Shelley.
Hey, girl, hey.
Hi.
This is one of my best friends. We've known each other since grad school, Chelsea Bullock.
I have a very serious question. If you could curate the shelfie that this book would sit in a stack with on everyone's nightstand, what additional 2 or 3 books would you pair with it?
Oh my God. So I would put the work of Anne Leckie on there. I would put the work of Rivers Solomon, particularly a novel called An Unkindness of Ghosts. I would put this is unfair. I would put Neon Yang's recent novel, Genesis of Misery. I would put on there. I'm thinking about space operas that are exploring similarly dark themes. Arcady Martine's Texcalon series would be on there. Do I read men? I'm only talking about women right now. I know.
Okay.
I know that I do read men, but they're not on this shelf with me. And there was one other that I was going to say, and now I'm forgetting them. Oh, Yoon Ha Lee, who writes, I can't remember what the trilogy is called, but the first one is called Nine Fox Gambit, which is incredible and weird and difficult to understand, and you should all read it. Yeah.
Hi, I'm in the middle of writing this. Well, I've been writing this essay for a long time and I'm now feeling empowered to publish it. It's called A Meaningful Fuck. And I'm thinking about it because I'm so excited when I hear writers talking about fucking, in particular, using that word. And to riff off of something Fred Moten said, fucking is fucking with you. It's fucking rebellion. It's connection. It's touch, it's words, it's all these things, right? How is fucking meaningful in these burning stars?
Yeah, so it's meaningful sexually, but it's also meaningful because so part of the plot of These Burning Stars is that my main villain, Essex Nightfoot, is hunting down the child whom you all saw fight in that. Years later, she's hunting them down. And they are hunting her in return. So they have this cat and mouse reverse game going back and forth. And Six, who is the character, they are 100% all the time fucking with Essex. And them fucking with Essex is a way to say, you ruined my life when I was a kid. Also, you're complicit in a genocide. Also, you're a monstrous human being. I'm going to take all of your pride and your ego and your evil and your complicity and the ways that you have been protected, and I'm going to tear it down. And you will end up being destroyed by the force of my power and my strength and my revenge. It's a book about revenge. And so I think that that we can think about that as a resistance tactic. How do we fuck with people? I got a comment on a tweet this morning that was talking about my book where this person said something to the effect of like, too bad this is queer. That used to be cute, but now it's boring. And quirky. He said it used to be interesting and quirky, and now it's boring. And because I am a professional, I did not respond. But I did not respond. There was no middle finger. My publishers are here. They're very grateful to hear that. But I want with all of my soul for someone to fuck with them, right? And I think what I love about gender expression and the growth of acceptance of non-binary and trans people is the way that we can fuck with people who want those of us who are non-binary to look the way they want us to. So like when Marilyn Fry, who I mentioned before, writes about how one of the first things we do is we look at a person and we assign them a gender. And if we can't do that, it fucks with us. And that is the power of gender expression and gender play and gender resistance. And when queer people are disempowered by the state, by religion, by all of these regimes, what better revenge than to make you uncomfortable, right? So I think there's incredible power in having women loving women fuck rather than just kiss and fade to black. And I think that there's incredible power in fucking with our oppressors. So, yeah.
So the booksellers are here. So we have.
You made it.
So we have time for maybe one more question or comment. Who wants to close us out? And then we'll, Cathy?
This is more a comment than a question. Sorry.
That is a classic.
I mean, it gives me huge pleasure that people associate me with trying to create community. And I must say that our community at the Futures Initiative is pretty fucking amazing.
Awesome.
But I love the solitary pleasure of reading your book and reading about such delicious revenge. And I am wondering how you had the courage to write so freely about just people, about revenge, about pure wholesale revenge, because clearly you're a lovely person. So what does that do? Well, how do you turn off that part of yourself and just write about revenge? Because we love it. It's fantastic to have that place we can turn to for revenge in a world where we have to be careful all the time.
Yeah, I think you're giving me too much credit for being a lovely person. But I'm quite deeply angry under my kind facade. So the book is about revenge, but it is also about complicity. And it is about realizing that you have been an agent of those who deserve to be revenged upon, and realizing that perhaps you also deserve to be revenged upon. And as a white woman, I recognize that in some ways I deserve to be revenged upon for the things that white people are responsible for. Now, I don't mean that in some kind of like maudlin, like, oh, I feel so guilty and things like that. Like white guilt, as many have theorized, is of no use to anyone. But what I do think is that so it was great fun to write a repulsive character and to write the revenge upon this repulsive character. But there's also part of the problem is who is seeking the revenge. And I think something that a lot of white people do is we say, I will come in and save you, person of color. I will come in and tell you the right way that we can get revenge for this injustice. And it happens to those of us who are queer from cis people, and those of us who are disabled from non-disabled people. People always want to come in and tell you what your liberation should look like. And I think that the pleasure of writing about revenge was an exercise of my own anger. And I think it's important also, I'll mention, I was writing it during the Trump years, right? I wrote the book, started the book in 2018. So it was definitely an exercise in my own fury, right? But the reason why the complicity is so important is because the fantasy of revenge sometimes can elide the actual positionality and right of oppressed people to determine what their own revenge should be, and whether it should be violent or whether it should be of a completely different kind. So. Yeah.
Yes, we have books. So let's give one more last generous applause to Bethany. And Margaret, thank you for those fabulous questions that you raised. So Lounge, let's just sell some books and mingle. Thank you, everyone.
I'm signing them.
Yes, yes, yes.
Where do I? Oh, I'm
yes, we're gonna do a signing.